Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting and being a part of this. It's really a pleasure for me to be a speaker this year, as I attended last year and saw so many great speakers and great presentations. My name is Kendra Bruce, and I'm going to be speaking a little bit on sort of the global economy, but more specifically career opportunities abroad. And I'm going to be somewhat general because it's only 10 minutes. So a little bit about me. My experience, if you could go to the next slide, my experience is that I've been living abroad for about 8 years, living and traveling. I've been to about 40 countries and really loved it. My start, as you can see, was Peace Corps as a business development volunteer in Albania. And then I went on to South Korea, Afghanistan, and now I'm teaching in the United Arab Emirates. So I've had a really great experience, and hopefully I can speak to some of that and get you interested in all of the opportunities that exist abroad. So next slide. Some of us, we think, oh, it would be great to go abroad, but what do we do? Why should we go there? Are there any benefits? Who would we work for? What would we do? Where would we even go? The world is so big. And then how do we make it happen? So for me, next slide, I really love adventure. As you can see, this picture is of a great white shark that I took myself when I went cage diving in South Africa. Lots and lots of adventures from going abroad, so that's definitely one of the reasons I went, and I think most people would want to go. Next slide are new experiences. So as you can see from these pictures, in Jordan at the Dead Sea with mud all over my face, in Mongolia in a 12-day trek to nowhere, in Namibia getting a hug from a seal, South Korean festivals, and in the middle you see this beautiful landscape. That's the most southern point of South Africa. So there are just so many experiences that are rich and wonderful when you go abroad. So excellent experiences. And next slide, you see money. There are a lot of opportunities, great jobs that pay well, often tax-free if you don't work for the US companies or government. You get your accommodations paid for, you get your tickets paid for, often some bonuses. So the money is definitely a perk. And of course, travel. If you just want to go and see the world, you're in the center of it all oftentimes, just to go and explore. And it's a lot cheaper to travel from the Middle East to, really anywhere than the US. So that's a little bit about why you might want to go. And then next, who would you work for? So you've got the US government or a US company, which offers more security, but maybe less financial perks in some ways. And then you have non-US, so you could work for a foreign company or a foreign government. So for the US government, next slide. As you can see here, I've listed Peace Corps volunteer or employee, State Department, USAID, military, and of course the contractors that go through the US government. There are so many opportunities through the government, but it takes longer. You definitely have to have some more expertise and experience. And often it's a pathway. So if you join the Peace Corps, then that helps you get into the State Department or to USAID. And it takes a lot of paperwork and can take years. Becoming a Peace Corps volunteer took a year and generally takes a year to a year and a half. USAID, the same thing, about a year, 2 years. State Department could be 2-3 years. Military is obviously a slightly different experience, and I can't speak too much to that, but I'm sure some of the people in the audience have some experience with that. Maybe can speak a little bit later. And as far as U.S. government employment, you can become a direct hire or you could be a contractor. So as a direct hire, you can become a Foreign Service officer or a Foreign Service Limited, which is they give you like a 5-year contract, but you're not considered a private service contractor. You're actually considered a direct hire, and it's renewable usually every year. But there's definitely a pecking order in the government. So as a direct hire, you're at the top, and then as a contractor, you're at the bottom, and the perks and whatnot end up sort of applying to those areas. So you get more if you're a direct hire. And then, of course, government contractors. You can become a direct hire with a government contractor and still experience the umbrella effect of the U.S. government's protection and security when you get employed. And then we have U.S. companies on the next slide. And for this, there are lots of opportunities with U.S. companies in lots of different fields: finance, health, nurses are wanted all over the world. And if you just look around in your own company within internal options, then maybe you can get a 2-week or 2-month option rather than having to go for a year or 2 years. It gives you a taste of it without too much risk and too much commitment. And honestly, this is the best way, either through the U.S. government or U.S. company, to work in Europe, because it's actually quite difficult to work in Europe unless you have an EU passport or something sort of linking you to that. That's probably one of the hardest places to work. Next slide, we have foreign companies versus foreign governments. Now, with foreign governments, you still have more protection because while you're under different laws and they have different expectations, you still have that sense of connection with your own government because they understand where you're coming from. They know that they're bringing you in from a different country, and so they do try to accommodate to some degree that you have different expectations, and they will often treat you a little bit differently because of that and give you a little bit more security. There's also better diversity in hiring oftentimes, and I say that because particularly in teaching, you find in Asian countries that hiring in a diverse way isn't always a must. There can be some discrimination, so unless you look American, they may not want you to teach and they may not hire you, so it could be more difficult. And I say that because it can be a little bit of a shock for Americans who have an expectation that they wouldn't be hired based on the picture that they send. But it can happen in a lot of countries, actually. But you find it particularly in Asia. With a foreign company, you can run into a lot of risk, actually. In fact, most of the negative stories I've heard about working abroad have come from working for local foreign companies. Now, I say local foreign companies because, for example, in the UAE, you have a lot of Western companies that have set up shop here, and they're just as legitimate as any company you might find in the US, versus working for a local Hagwon, for example, which is a sort of private school in Korea, and they can be very risky. They can fire you whenever they want without too much headache, and you're out of a job, and now you have to somehow find your way home. So there's definitely a greater risk there. All right, and then next slide. What can you do? Everything. There are so many different options abroad. Common industries would be international development, security, oil and gas. You can see on the slide a lot of different options. You just have to look around for them. And depending on the area that you choose, you may need more experience or not. And I can tell you, for teaching, as long as you're a native English speaker, you can pretty much go anywhere in the world. It is an open field day. So there are just so many options. And in the Middle East is pretty much run on expat labor. So engineers, architects, accountants, finance, banking, all that stuff, you can get a job very easily. Even if you want to be a kayak instructor or a swim instructor, you can find jobs here. Next slide. So where to go? As I mentioned earlier, Europe is very difficult without an EU passport, but there is still a lot of options, especially if you go through the US government or a US company. The Middle East, I find the Middle East to be really wonderful. It's basically like living in the US. You have a few more restrictions, but nothing too tricky because they're used to having expats here, and so I find Middle Easterners to be very kind, warm, and welcoming. So don't let the news scare you. It's a really great place to work. You do need to often have more experience when you work in the Middle East. They expect you to have a good 5 or 6 years of experience before you come here, and higher degree levels. In Asia, English teachers everywhere, and often you don't need experience at all. So it's a great place if you're younger and you've never really been abroad, you don't have a lot of experience, really great place to get your feet wet. Southeast Asia, the same thing, but usually they pay a little bit less, and it's a little bit more risky. The companies just sort of pop up everywhere, so it's a lot harder to find legit companies to work for. South America, often I've found the pay is not quite as good, depending on the field. This is more specifically for teaching, and it's a little bit riskier economically and just sort of the security situation, and not quite as much in the way of opportunities. But if you're just looking to learn Spanish and travel around South America, it doesn't matter, right? Don't expect to get rich, but definitely some opportunities and options for people who want to go there. So next, and really the last bit, so next slide. This is how. Very easy. I put some websites up there, and the Beltway Bandits that are sort of notorious U.S. contractors. If you go directly to their websites, there are lots of job options. And the job options, even for the military, they don't have to be specifically development or diplomacy or security. They can be in sewer management or engineering or building, electrical, mechanics. There are lots of different jobs that are available for lots of different fields. So don't ever feel like, what it is that you do in the US you couldn't possibly do abroad, because there are opportunities. You just have to look around for them. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed and it's at least tickled your interest a little bit. If you have any questions, you can feel free to get in contact with me at my email, kendra.bruce@gmail.com. And now it's open to questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
So do we have any questions? Where's the first question? Susan.
Do I talk into this?
Yep.
Hi, Ken. How do I turn it on?
Hi.
Do I turn?
It's on.
It's on. Okay. Hi, Kendra. Susan Thanis. I met you last year, and I was just looking at your card a few days ago. My husband was Albanian, and I had been to Albania several times. We talked about that. But thank you for all your suggestions today. I think they're wonderful. Tomorrow I'm going to be speaking about teaching around the world. So, and I agree. I agree. I'm wondering about one thing about this is that you do have to be aware that some of the countries have restrictions. For instance, China, where I generally go to teach and lead teachers to teach, has a restriction that the government will not hire anybody 70 or older. And, a lot of us aren't completely aged out, at 70. You can find some private places. I'm wondering, what about consultant work? Do you find that abroad it's not difficult to find consultant work that wouldn't be full-time, but perhaps for 6 months or 4 months or something like that?
I would say consultant work is best done through the U.S. government. There are lots of opportunities through the U.S. government, through State Department, USAID, the military. You see tons of consultants coming through. And that's probably the most secure and best paying option. Now, you can become a consultant. I would say in the Middle East, you have the best option because there are a lot of professionals here, but the same issues apply as far as aging out. Now, as a consultant, you might be able to get around that a little bit because, if you have expertise that they need, they will work around it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Payal.
Kendra, hi. I was hoping to see you here this year.
Hi. It's so good to see you even via Skype.
Same here. I just want to add something and then a question. You spoke about the younger traveler that's seeking adventure. You spoke about the on the other end, who's adding value to the world in their own way. I'm kind of right in the middle, and I just came back from my 2-year kind of sabbatical, and I also taught in various places. Bhutan was my favorite. Question for you. I did it in this way that I just showed up and navigated my way around. And then the other way to do it is get a posting and then go. In your experience, what might be easier or more difficult, one way or the other?
I would say getting a posting while you're still in the US is the best option. You seem to have more negotiating power, you get more perks as far as flights and all of that, and you're able to get all your paperwork done, which in the Middle East for sure is a bit of a pain. You have to get things attested and you have to get background checks and whatnot. So I found it to be more perks by coming through the US. However, you often don't have to go through all the jumps and hoops and loops in order to get hired if you're hired within the country. So, but you often don't get perks and you might get lower pay and, you know, maybe not the flights and all that stuff. So it really, it depends on where you're at and what you want.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to use moderator privileges here and ask 2 questions, and you may have answered some of this earlier. But what inspired you or what drove you personally to go off and, you know, work abroad? And what was the thing that you found most challenging personally living overseas and working overseas?
Well, I always wanted to see the world. I've always had that urge, that interest, and I really always wanted to join the Peace Corps. I thought I was going to go off and save the world. What I realized was I learned much more than I think I put into my Peace Corps experience, but really a worthwhile experience. And I will say the first 3 months where I lived in the village without water and electricity and most modern conveniences was very challenging, but it was the mentality that I wasn't expecting to be so difficult. You expect people to believe a certain way when you're American. You just have this idea that everyone sort of thinks that everything is possible and that if you put the work in that you can change everything, you can change your circumstances and make them better. And what I realized, particularly in the Peace Corps, was that people often don't have that mentality. They have given in to their circumstances, understandably so, and they feel that they can't change them. So that was very difficult for me, and probably the most challenging was getting through that mentality and trying to work and still be able to make progress in what it was that I was doing as a Peace Corps volunteer. And you find mentality, the different mentalities in every country can throw you for a loop a little bit. So being able to adjust and understand and sometimes just accept that this is the way it is and you're the one that needs to change, that can be the trickiest part.
We have time for one more question. Do we have one more question from the audience? Bill, go ahead.
How many languages do you speak, Kendra?
Well, I speak English pretty well, and I speak Albanian somewhat well. I have some words in every language, it seems, you know, the good ones like thank you and please. Those really help when you need somebody to do something for you. Like, please, please let me cross the border. Whatever language you can muster, you need it. So I try to learn the really important words in just about every language I visit in whatever country.
All right. Well, thank you, Kendra, for your time and for dialing in from the UAE. Hopefully we'll see you here in person next year. But we're glad you were able to join us via the web. All right. Can we get a round of applause?
Thank you, everyone. Bye.